I want to make this statement extremely clear. I love platformers. Ever since I came into being, I've loved the act of jumping. It's practically my middle name. And what more to promote jumping than the existence of the second dimension? 2D platformers are a gaming genre that's been around since gaming itself. Unless you count Pong. And this mainly all got started with one very special game. Donkey Kong. I know everyone likes to flaunt the original Super Mario Bros. As the start of platforming. And while yes, it did kickstart the side-scrolling variety of 2D platformers, Donkey Kong was present about 4 years earlier. However, Space Panic was released the year prior, but then again, it's Space Panic. Now, if I'm being honest, I don't really like Donkey Kong, or at least that original game, which makes a lot of sense for a platformer released in 1981. But still, even Donkey Kong is better than Donkey Kong. Wait a minute. Yes, Donkey Kong got more games, which makes quite a bit of sense because my first instinct when I see this ape is give him bongos. He's a natural. These games range from the remakes of that original game to, hey, let's destroy the little goodwill we have left. Most of them were fine, but what about an actual platformer like that original game? Well, if Donkey Kong Jungle Beat ain't cutting it for you, the Donkey Kong Country series should do the trick. This was a series of games back on the SNES that took after that original game. And what I mean by that is Nintendo had to surgically remove Donkey Kong and squeeze him into a platform that isn't stuck to one screen. The original Donkey Kong Country came on a bit later into the life of the SNES, around the time the PS1 was about to kick down Nintendo's door. But this wasn't just some ordinary 2D platformer, it pushed the limits of what the SNES could do by looking pretty. Most SNES games have a certain pixelated style to them, and while it is rather endearing when looking back on it, it's honestly just a limitation of what the hardware was capable of. But Donkey Kong Country ditches that 16-bit style in favor of realism. And out of all games to give this style to, this was a great choice. The landscapes of Donkey Kong games can't really be put to justice in just 16 bits, unless we're talking about the original. In that case, I think it'll do just fine. But when trying to replicate the deep, dark mines or lush jungle atmosphere, the 16-bit style can definitely hold the game back in a few places. Now you might ask, if I like graphical quality so much, why am I a Nintendo fan? Nintendo doesn't usually put out the highest graphical quality compared to the rest of the market. However, I can look at this and say that it's enough. I don't need higher quality graphics to enjoy these games. They already showcase the atmosphere and vibe of the game well enough. So while higher quality graphics are nice, it doesn't really matter to me at the end of the day. But in the case of the SNES, it's absolutely jaw-dropping to see these graphics on this system. It was an incredible display of what the SNES could do at its full power. It's amazing how they were able to get all the sprites and backgrounds to look so detailed on a console that would be relevant just a few years later. And it's also the fact that the backgrounds and sprites do a great deal in getting the player immersed in the beautiful world of the game. I mean, come on, that's the best looking tree on the system. But graphics aren't any good for a game if the gameplay's garbage. And this game doesn't disappoint in that department either. Almost every level in this game is a joy to go through. All the obstacles are placed in such a meticulous way that it makes the levels challenging, but not to an absurd degree. While some levels do have some pretty bad blind sights with sharks or minecart riding crocodiles dashing at you from out of nowhere, a general majority of the levels give you a rhythm to go with. Some are fast-paced escapades through dangerous waters, while others are relaxing and slow platforming in a large factory. It makes every level theme feel unique and a fun experience to go through. And while this game is a point A to point B platformer, there are some things to do in these levels. There are the Kong letters, which are spread throughout the stage. These can sometimes be a bit hidden, but most of the time they're pretty upfront and can be found just by going through the level. Obtaining all of them in a stage nets you an extra life, which honestly isn't much. The animal tokens. The what? This is probably the most useless collectible in the entire series. If you collect 3 of one type, you'll get to go to a bonus room, which gets you quite a few lives. But because these boot you back to your last checkpoint, sometimes it isn't worth it to pick these things up. But another worthwhile thing you can do in these levels are the bonus rooms. But are they really though? These are the only collectibles required for 101%, and they're pretty pathetic. A general majority of them can be found through a good use of exploration, but some of these are basically just a suicide mission. You just have to pray that you fell down the right cliff, because some of these bonus room locations are just begging for me to consult a guide. It's times like these where I'm not embarrassed to look something up because of how obscene some of these hiding places are. And that's probably why this is my least favorite Donkey Kong Country game to go for everything in. It just doesn't feel worth it when I found a bunch of these and my only reward for finding them is a couple of lives and a little quip from Cranky at the end of the game. But that shouldn't diminish the fact that these levels are designed wonderfully and have a great atmosphere to go with them. And that's partly thanks to the incredible soundtrack of the game. I'm no music expert, so I don't understand this, or even this. But I do understand that the compositions in this game are some of the best in the 16-bit era. And let me look what I have to talk about next. The bosses in this game aren't anything special. They're probably the worst part of the game as a whole. They barely do anything. And the only one worth a mention is the final boss because he's the only one that actually does stuff. The rest of them just jump around and throw nuts at you, which isn't the most effective strategy, unless the Kongs have a nut allergy, in which case that's actually pretty smart. And the save feature in this game is awful. You can only save your game by going to Candy's save point, which is sometimes rather far into an area. And if you happen to get a game over, you have to go all the way back to where you last saved, which can sometimes be a bit of a horrible inconvenience. But despite all of that, this is still one of the best games on the system. And I know it might seem like an out of left field response considering all the bad things this game offers, but it's just that the platforming and level design is so good that it's pretty easy to look past its flaws. And that was the general perspective of the game at the time. The game was seen as the savior of the SNES in a time of desperate need. It was able to keep the sales for the SNES at a rather high rate during the PlayStation takeover, which was believed to be why it beat out the Sega Genesis in terms of unit sales. It became the third best-selling game on the system, selling over 9 million copies, which is nothing to sneeze at. So, what happens when a game is a critical and financial success? You make a Game Boy port. You make a GBA port. You make a sequel. While Donkey Kong Country got the ball rolling, Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Conquest is synonymous with the thing known as goodwill. This game is known to many as possibly one of the greatest platformers ever made. Everything this game did, it did well. It improved upon everything that the original game set up, and I avoided playing this game for the longest time, as it wasn't really a must-play for me up until the past year or so. You can get me to play Mario's Tennis on the Virtual Boy no problem, but if you put up both the prospect of an ape and a sequel, I'm gonna have to think about it. But eventually, I started to play the game, and now I can see what everyone's raving about. Every single level in this game has a stunning flow to it all, making it an extremely hard game to put down. And the collectibles in the game are leagues better than the bonus rooms. What more to replace the bonus rooms than the bonus rooms? These might be the same general concept as before, but the execution is much better. The hints as to where these are much more telling, but they also allow you to think a bit more critically. And what you do within these is different as well. Instead of doing next to nothing or taking up a gambling addiction, you have to perform a small platforming challenge, whether it be getting to the end or defeating the enemies. All of these are really fun. And what's more interesting is that at the end of these, you get these shiny circles of wonder called Krem coins. These can be used to access some extra levels in the Lost World, and these provide some of the toughest challenges in the game, especially animal antics. And I didn't mention the animal buddies before when they were in the first game, but that's because I don't think they were used in very many interesting ways. Or maybe I just hate ostriches. But in this game, some levels are specifically built for using them, which does a great job in allowing the player to understand the benefits of using them. And the bosses aren't great, but they aren't stupid either, so that's a plus. But one thing I feel like this game dialed down a bit was the calm and relaxing atmosphere that the original game lathered itself in. However, that's mostly because this entire game takes place in enemy territory. You aren't in Donkey Kong Country anymore, and I think that adds to the intensity and dark mood this game goes for. So even though I prefer the relaxing nature of the original, the uneasiness that the sequel provides is still great. And another quick thing to mention would be the soundtrack, which absolutely slaps. And after playing through it all to the end, I can now see why everyone adores this game. The platforming, collectibles, and atmosphere are all top notch, and it makes for a game that deserves all of the praise it's given. But how did they follow that up? Where's the priest when you need him? Donkey Kong Country 3 Dixie Kong's Double Trouble is a Donkey Kong Country game, and it's rather good. Just not that great. It all comes down to the level design. It doesn't have that same level of flow as those previous two games. I can't really pick and choose a bad level, but most of them are just boring conceptually and never reach the height of those in 1 and 2. And the music? what happened here? Again, it isn't bad, and there are a few good ones in here, but overall, it's a bit of a meh. This game is more similar to Donkey Kong Country 2 in terms of the style it tries to replicate, but honestly, you should just go play that game. Donkey Kong Country 2 does pretty much everything better than this game, so there isn't much of a reason to play 3 over 2. And one might argue that that would make Donkey Kong Country 1 irrelevant in comparison to 2, but not really. I feel like the game has enough of its own uniqueness and style to be preferred over other games. This is just Donkey Kong Country 2, but a bit worse. But what does this game do right? That's a great question. Well, if there's anything, I can say that the explorable overworld is a good scene setter and is decently immersive. The story is almost non-existent. Enough on the subject. There are bears! Really? Well then I have to play this game right now! And don't even talk to me about the hard mode cheat code. So while enjoyable, this game does very little to make it stand out. And then, something interesting happened. Nothing. There wasn't a single mainline Donkey Kong Country game from 1997 to 2009. This is partly because Rare, the company that partnered with Nintendo to make the Donkey Kong Country games, had been bought out by Microsoft, which is really sad, seeing as they did nothing of note after their departure from Nintendo. But now that they're gone, Retro Studios had to take their place as the development team behind these games. And oh boy, Retro Studios really knows how to make a good revival of irrelevant Nintendo franchises. They're so good at it, I think that they should make a new Mario Party. We haven't had one of those in a long time. They previously made Metroid Prime, which evolved the 2D Metroids of yesteryear into a really good first-person shooter. Fans loved this game, so the company had already made a good reputation for themselves. And when they touched Donkey Kong, this was born to be a masterpiece. And it was a masterpiece. I can't think of any other 2D platformer on the Wii that's as good as this one. It truly is just another Donkey Kong Country game, just with new locations and areas to explore. They did a great job making this game as similar to those first 3 games as possible. This game makes it feel as if Donkey Kong Country never left. And if he did, he came back with lung cancer. This is the one problem that most people have with the game, and the Wii in general. The motion controls. But maybe it's just because I grew up with this game and the rest of the Wii library, but I never had a problem with it. While I do prefer button controls more than motion controls, I have to admit that this is still a very fluent game to play. But for some people, it just doesn't click. Although, if you can get past that issue, this is a great game. I applaud pretty much every level in this game for being a really entertaining time, especially those tempo levels. They're just the right amount of difficult to be fun and challenging at the same time. And these can be unlocked by collecting all the Kong letters in the world, which are required for 100% now. And the bosses in this game are actually quite good. Most follow a similar pattern of having 3 phases and then being done with it. And after finally reaching 100%, do it again. But backwards. Really? And there are also the time trials, which are fine in theory when talking about just the gold medals, but there are also the shiny gold medals, and these are abysmal. It takes so much effort to get them, and for what? Bragging rights? But none of that really matters. This is still an incredible game, with level design that takes my breath away. It's definitely a worthy successor to those first 3 games, and it might even be close to topping Donkey Kong Country 2, if only there was a bit more. Well, February 14th, 2014 was my lucky day. Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze might just be one of the greatest 2D platformers I have ever played. This game is really just returns, but a bit better. And that game was already great. Pushing aside the differences in mood, the main difference between these two is the level design. Tropical Freeze is some of the greatest levels I have ever had the pleasure of running through. Not that Returns didn't impress me. The locations are so varied and creative while also staying grounded in reality, aside from the final world, but I'm sure I can give that a pass. And the graphics of this game are pure eye candy. I mean, look at that banana! But there's just one problem with this game. It released on this thing, which heavily played into how low its sales were. But the Switch set out to change that, as Tropical Freeze was going to be a port to the system. So, what does it add? A new mode centered around that one character from Mario Kart Wii. This is basically just an easy mode for the game, so I honestly didn't bother with it. But the button controls here are more than warranted. These give the game so much more momentum and precision. But one could argue that I should have used the Wii U gamepad when playing the original Tropical Freeze. And to combat those claims, I'm gonna say I'd rather get nausea than polio. Why do you think I bought a Virtual Boy? But one nitpick that I do have is the final boss. It just doesn't feel climactic enough to be a final battle. Not that it was easy, but when I beat him, I was expecting some second phase to come out and say, gotcha. But that didn't happen, which is a bit disappointing. But other than that, this is an incredible game. And it's probably better than even Donkey Kong Country 2 when going off personal opinion. But when speaking about the series as a whole, it's breathtaking. Every game in the series is such finely tuned that you can't not have a good time while playing them. Sure, some of them may have their frustrating moments, but that's usually to teach you a lesson of better platforming and predictions as to what's coming up. When I fail at these games, it's because I messed up, and I have to get better at doing that particular thing. These games are pure platforming bliss, and easily my go-to platforming series on the consoles that they're on. But I'm still waiting for it to come to Virtual Boy. I only bought this thing because I thought there would be an ape on it, but no, I got scammed.